Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
We got data, people. That's what you come for. Or maybe you don't, I don't know. Come for the data, stay for the dumb dad jokes. That's how we roll here on Fantasy NBA Today. What's happening, everybody? It's the hell day is Thursday. It's Thursday. We got one more this week after this one. Whew, deep breath. Deep breath. Yesterday's show was a conversation from me to me with me on handling this crush of injuries happening now, in addition to protocol stuff. And it was brought up on Twitter, and I'm an idiot because I never write down the very smart things that people do say to me sometimes. And the point was made that on yesterday's show, I talked about how you could sort of just glaze over when your team gets crushed with injuries, or you can get real cutthroat with it. Another option that was brought up was trading, which I didn't bring up on yesterday's show, and that's an oversight on my part for a couple of reasons. Number one, the first thought that I had was, look, if someone's injured for whatever it is, call it a 2-week injury, that's like the COVID number these days, by the time you find a trade partner and execute the trade, and then wait the annoying waiting period that most leagues have, you're probably halfway through the time you got off. At that point, you might as well just glaze over for the other week. But if it's a longer-term injury, someone like, say, a Bam Adebayo a few weeks back, although I guess the problem there is that there weren't many guys out when he got hurt. He was one of the first. But let's say that you lost Dame this last week ago, or whenever this rest process started, and then rolled into the surgery. If you already had 4 guys out and Dame was your 5th, that's a spot where you're like, look, I think I probably have to trade this dude. I don't know what you're going to get for him right now. Probably not much, but that is another option on the table. Today, I wanted to pivot to a different player that I haven't covered all that much, mostly because I don't think we know what's going to happen with him. So let me talk to you for a minute about Paul George, today's podcast. We'll obviously go over yesterday's results. Don't worry, we got box score review to get into. But let me talk to you for a minute about Paul George, who's out with elbow ligament issues, and we don't really know if or when he might be coming back. He's going to be reevaluated after about a month from when they shut him down. And if things are not improving, then I believe Tommy John surgery would be an option there. I think it's the UCL that he's dealing with. But regardless of what specifically the problem is for Paul George, there are 2 very distinct paths that the rest of his season might take. One of them is he comes back, and he's mostly Paul George again after that point. The other one is he doesn't. And you end up with next to nothing for someone you effectively used your first or turn pick on. So the only thing that I can say, at least on the injury front, is I don't really know. I don't know when he's coming back. I don't know if he's coming back. I'm not in the Clippers locker room. I'm not part of their athletic trainer team. We have no tea leaves to read because there have been no updates on him since he went down. The only thing we can do as NBA fans, as fantasy analysts, is to look at the standings and try to make a guess of, okay, well, how much will he want to come back? And I think the answer to that is a decent amount. There are a top 9 in the Western Conference that, as of right now, are pretty safely making the playoffs in some capacity. It might be at play-in tournament level, which is where the Clippers are at. They are the front end of the play-in tournament at the moment, but they're only a half game back of the Nuggets, game and a half back of the Mavericks, who seem, by the way, to be maybe one click above some of those other teams now, along with the Lakers. The Wolves are on the other side of the Clippers. There's a chunk of teams that are probably all going to be in the playoffs, and then it's kind of a matter of where they might be. The problem, of course, is that Paul George, the desire to return and make a playoff run, probably hinges at least a little bit on whether or not Kawhi Leonard is getting back to make a playoff run. If he's getting close, you might see Paul George push a little harder, but does that mean that he needs to get back right away. Clippers are 4-6 in their last 10 ball games. They've been relatively ugly, but they've managed to squeeze out a handful of wins in that mix. And at the moment, that isn't moving them any closer to missing the playoffs. That is to say, all of the teams right now, and the Blazers at the moment are the 10 seed. So if you look at the Kings in the 11 seed, who did just beat the Lakers yesterday, they're a game back of the Blazers, but they're 4.5 back of the Wolves, 5 of the Lakers, 5 of the Clippers, and they're 4-6 their last 10 games. Spurs are 2-8. Pelicans have gained a game on some of these other teams, but they're still pretty far back. So even if Paul George, whatever the reevaluation date might be, another week, 2 weeks, whatever the timeline was allowing, the dude hadn't played much basketball in the last little bit. Whatever it is, 1 week, 2 week, 3 weeks, it's probably still too early to know if Kawhi Leonard is going to get back for a playoff run. And it's almost so early that the Clippers can probably look at their calendar and say, well, we could hold him out a little bit longer, and we'll probably still make the play-in tournament at the very least. Paul George's last game was December 22nd. He only played 2 games after resting from the 6th to the 20th. So we're about 3 weeks into his shutdown, right? Roughly, give or take. I think it's 3 weeks and a day. I think they were going to reevaluate him at about 4-week mark when the first report came out, maybe to be more like 5. Whatever. If we're really talking about next week or the week after that, Clippers are not going to be in jeopardy of falling behind the Kings and out of the play-in tournament in a week or 2 weeks even, especially if they keep winning about half of their ball games. Kings are probably also going to win about half of their ball games. Something dramatic would have to happen for the Clippers to be in any kind of fear spot in the next 10 days. A month from now, yeah, they could be in a fear spot. If the Clippers go 4-6 for another 10 games, then 4-6 for another 10 games after that, and you're like a month and change from this one. You know, they've gone 8-12. Let's say the Blazers have been middling. I don't know. The Pelicans, maybe the Pelicans make a move. They try to pick up some victories. They go 12-8. All of a sudden, which, I mean, I don't expect them to do it, but you never know. Kings could get hot. I doubt it. Spurs could get hot. I doubt it. There's a lot of I doubt it's there. But let's say one of those teams has a slightly decent month, and they go roughly 12-8 over a little over a month of basketball. All of a sudden, the Pelicans now would only be about a game and a half, roughly, back of the Clippers. So then there's a fear moment. Then it's like, okay, well, Paul, if you're coming back, we need you now. We can't be going 4-6 in our next 10. It needs to be 6-4. Kawhi might still be a month away, but someone's got to keep us afloat. To that end, this, by the way, this is the deep tea leaf read that we're trying to do here. This might all be completely wrong, too. It's just to say there's no harm in them holding him out a little bit longer if he's not quite right yet, because they're not in any danger yet. And at the same time, it does buy them more time to figure out if Kawhi's coming back. If we wait another month on Paul George, and the news on Kawhi is still he's a ways off, Clippers might just punt on this year. All that to say, there's probably like a 30% chance Paul George plays shortly after this first eval. Probably a larger chance he doesn't. And I think the community at large, the way they feel about PG, reflects that fear. That the data just out there on the paper, which again, we're guessing a little bit, but all the things we just talked about lead to a conclusion of why rush him? The standings don't say we need to rush. Kawhi says we don't need to rush his status. And presumably, he won't be 100% healthy in a week. I doubt it, at least. I'm sure he misses basketball, but this is a business decision, too. So, we did our 4 polls late last night. I threw them up before I went to bed, which is just the absolute worst time to do a poll overnight. But we got enough votes, I think, to where the sample size will be okay. On the head-to-head side, we got about 300-ish votes per poll. On the Roto side, we got about 150 to 200 votes per poll. Yes, if I did it in the middle of the day, that number would have been higher. But you know what? I don't care. We got enough to go on. We're going to start on the Roto side because, as usual, Roto Games Cap leagues are easier to make a decision on. Generally, teams are okay with sitting on a guy. Because of that, it's usually harder to buy an injured player and easier to sell an injured player. So the first poll was, for those that are trying to sell, trying to get rid of Paul George, what is the lowest ranked player you'd take back? And the largest result, I did the first 2 rounds, second 2 rounds, 5th round, and then anything outside of the 5th round. Biggest result was actually 3rd, 4th rounder, which is, I think, pretty reasonable. But that's Roto players saying, I need something decent back because squatting on this dude isn't that hard. Outside the top 60 actually got 30%. So a lot of folks were like, look, I'll take whatever at this point. 49 to 60, the 5th round was pretty small at 17%. And the first 2 rounds at 17% at a glance seems kind of small. But I think it's also worth comparing that to what we get on the head-to-head side. Head-to-head managers that are thinking about trading away Paul George, by and large, believe it or not, are looking for, I should say it's almost a little bit more evenly split. Although the 3rd, 4th round ended up being the big one. That was about 40%. So even on head-to-head, folks are expecting a 4th rounder, 3rd, 4th rounder. First 2 rounds down by about 2 percentage points compared to Roto. So there's a smaller, I think there's more of an acceptance among head-to-head managers. You're not going to get a 1st or 2nd rounder for Paul George right now. And outside the top 60 was a lot smaller. That surprised the heck out of me. I have no reasonable explanation for that. I might just chalk it up to the sample size thing. But I would have thought that head-to-head managers would have been more likely to take back less. As it turns out, if you look at kind of the way this thing chunks out, yes, head-to-head managers were oddly less willing to part with him for the very low-valued guys, but more willing to part with Paul George for the 3rd, 4th, or 5th rounder. It got clustered a bit in that 3-round block. About 62% of respondents said that they would take a 3rd, 4th, or 5th rounder back, whereas in Roto, that number was actually only 53%. That's a pretty significant drop-off, with 2 extra on the front end and then 8 extra percentage points on the back end of what Roto folks will be willing to sell for. Opposite side of the ledger. What about what someone willing to give up for Paul George? Roto Games Cap managers basically just said, we're not giving you a 1st or 2nd rounder. Something else is on the table. 31% said 3rd or 4th rounder. 24% said a 5th rounder. And 35% said anyone back of a 5th rounder. I got bad news for that last one. You're probably not going to get Paul George for someone outside of the fifth round. Over on the head-to-head side, what's the highest-ranked player you'd give up to obtain Paul George? Only 6.5% said first 2 rounds. That's the smallest result of any poll outcome of the 16 outcomes we've talked about so far. So head-to-head managers, they don't want nothing to do with the guy who's out and might be out the rest of the way. 31% said 3rd or 4th rounder. 39% said 5th rounder. And only 24% said outside the top 5 rounds, so outside the top 60 in 12-teamers. That's kind of how I did it. With 12-teamers, that's the easiest way to break this thing down. What this tells us is that most folks are willing to go above the top 60 on the head-to-head side, which is really interesting. It's almost as though folks are taking this data and saying, we think Paul George comes back, just not yet. Like, we think he's going to be out longer, but we think he's going to be around at a pivotal juncture later in the year. We'll give you a 5th rounder, which is odd because over on the Roto side, again, and I wonder if, maybe the overnight Roto folks were feeling particularly irritated. The fact that 35% said that outside the top 60 was the highest they'd go on the roto side. We're at 24% on the head-to-head. Most head-to-head folks are willing to pay a little bit more. But, once again, the head-to-head folks also said no way to going into that first 2 rounds. That's a consistent one. On the roto side, it was 10% considered the first 2 rounds. Head-to-head, 6.5%. Really nobody. 10% is also quite small, but that's a change that we expected. Now, if we really wanted to dig farther on this, we could break it down into smaller runs of numbers. Like, okay, we accept that no one's going to give up a first or second rounder, but where does it fall in between? 3rd and 4th round. Can we narrow it down a little bit tighter? Yeah, that's probably worth doing if we were really going to hone in on this thing. But I think what we can take away from looking, and this is where you want to compare the formats, basically. Roto Games Cap, we learned that folks that are selling on Paul George are basically expecting a 3rd or 4th rounder back. Roto Games Cap folks that are attempting to purchase on Paul George are actually willing to go into that range. My guess would be more towards the back end. So that tells me if you're in a Roto Games Cap league and you want to move Paul George, someone between 35 and 50 probably still gets it done. Roughly a third of the time. And if you went 1 round farther, if you add in that 5th round to the mix, then you're basically talking about 53% of leagues have kind of agreed that the buy-sell price for Paul George is a 3rd, 4th, or 5th rounder. Somewhere between 25 and 60. That's a big window. I get it. Narrowing that down is something. It takes a little bit of time. But if you have, say, I don't know, looking at Gordon Hayward is number 53, that might get it done in some leagues. Do you need to go higher? Terry Rozier at 42, that would probably get it done. Desmond Bane, he's 43. There's might not maybe enough name value there. Jaylen Brown would get it done. DeAndre Ayton would probably get it done. I don't think I'd go higher than that on the buy side. On the head-to-head side of the ledger, those selling on Paul George are still expecting a 3rd, roughly, or 4th rounder back. Those buying on Paul George are looking to spend closer to a 5th rounder. So it's head-to-head leagues where there's a little bit of a disconnect. You're going to have to come meet in the middle, head-to-head trade partners, at probably a 4th round valuation. So somewhere between 37 and 48. That's probably what it's going to take. In a Roto, there's a chance it would cost a little bit more. You might need to go as high as, I don't know, OG at 37, or Jonas Valanciunas at 33, DeMar DeRozan at 34. You might need to go a little higher on the Roto side, whereas head-to-head, some of the names I just dropped a minute ago, those are probably the guys you're looking at. Jaylen Brown is 46. That might be the perfect head-to-head match. And I get it. You're like, I want to trade for Paul George, but I only want to give up Evan Mobley. Or I only want to give up Chris Middleton or Gordon Hayward. It might not be enough. Because as we just learned from these polls, those that are trading him away in head-to-head, or Roto, really, both are expecting 3rd or 4th rounders to come back. The difference is that on the Roto side, those buying on Paul George are fully aware, like, yeah, we get it. You're going to want a 3rd or 4th rounder back. We're going to try to sell you on a 4th rounder. And on head-to-head side, they're like, yeah, we know you want a 3rd or 4th rounder, but we're giving you a 5th. So you better come down towards us or this ain't happening. All right, that's your Paul George breakdown. 19 minutes on Paul George. What a weird way to start a podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today. I'm your host, Dan Bespris. You can follow me on Twitter at Dan Bespris. And not that it matters at all, but I hit 9,300 Twitter follows today. And saying the number out loud is a perfect way to guarantee that you lose 5 followers. It happens without fail every single time. But hey, if you want to be part of the fun, would love to have you. I've become weirdly addicted to it. It was not by design. That's what I always say about my becoming a guy who wears hats. I never wanted to be a hat guy, but then male pattern baldness happened, and here we are. I never meant to be the Twitter guy. And yet, now I'm a Twitter guy. Whatever. Hey, while you're floating around across the interwebs and you're following me on Twitter, you should also follow Ethos Fantasy BK, the single greatest fantasy NBA news feed on planet freaking Earth. I've noticed that a lot of you have actually taken my advice and done it, and I know you're better fantasy players for it. Also, this is a big week for ExpressVPN and our partnership with them. Make sure to check out expressvpn.com/hoopball and protect your privacy, as they say. Protect it. Because look, here's the thing. You need a VPN. 1, protect your information from your ISP because they're selling it. 2, if you ever use a wireless network that's not your own house, hackers can infiltrate and sell your information for up to $1,000 a pop. Just personal info on the dark web. All you got to do is sign on a Wi-Fi network at a hotel. That's a place you need a VPN. You need a VPN if you're trying to watch streaming services, so folks don't know exactly what you're streaming, and you can be in different locations. Using the internet without ExpressVPN is like leaving the keys to your car in the middle, just sitting there on the console while you walk into an AM/PM. You wouldn't do that. You'd take them with you. Why don't we do that on the internet? I really don't know. ExpressVPN.com/hoopball is the special URL. Make sure to use that. When you sign up for a year, the yearly membership, you get 3 extra months. So it's 15 months for the price of 12. Only at expressvpn.com/hoopball. Make sure to use that special URL to get the bonus. And a big thank you to those guys for setting us up with an ExpressVPN account here at Hoopball as well. I have used it, and I feel safer and happier because of it. Some results. By the way, there's been a really big push for us to talk about stashing more. I think the trade deadline being within that 1-month window, that's the moment. We'll try to set up a few shows on those topics for next week. I know we did a little bit with Adam Tuesday, and we'll get some more of those going next week. One of our buddies, Jonas Nader, is a big-time stash monster. So I'll try to get him on the pod. I'm sure he's got a few tricks up his sleeve. As far as yesterday goes, a medium big Wednesday, 9-game card. Boston at Indiana. No Marcus Smart. Dennis Schroeder did his thing. That's what happens when one of the main 3 guys for the Celtics is out. I don't trust Schroeder in a Roto Games cap. I know he had a good ball game here, good shooting. That was a big part of it. Hit some 3-pointers. He's more of a schedule stream. Oh, Indiana. Malcolm Brogdon came back, played 17 minutes, and left with a sore Achilles again. I don't know if he's playing again this season, guys. I'm a little doom and gloom there. I get it. Maybe I shouldn't be, but to try repeatedly to come back from this thing and it's just not happening. You can't drop him until somebody says something. I think the writing's on the wall there. We'll see. Charlotte beat Philadelphia, snapped a little winning streak for the Sixers. Big game for Gordon Hayward. That vaulted him about a full round up the rank board. And the Hornets look pretty good lately. Doing it with a balanced attack that's not as LaMelo Ball-centric as at the start of the year. By the way, it's very easy to forget where the Hornets are. They're 23-19, having a pretty good season. 7 seed in the East. I'm sure they'd love to get past the Cavs and out of the play-in tournament. The East is pretty good and pretty balanced this year. I mean, the Celtics and the Knicks are tied for the last play-in spot. That's a lot of teams over 500. 11 in the East. Only 8 in the Western Conference. Now, the top of the Western Conference is a bit heavier than the East. Everybody's bunched together, those first 11 seeds. But the East is better this season. It's not the run over that it's been for many years. Things are finally leveling off. I don't know why I got on that little sidetrack. It is worth mentioning, though, that LaMelo Ball now is outside the first round. He's number 13 after sitting in that 5, 6, 7 range for a while. 88% still at the free throw line. Things have just come down a little bit. He doesn't need to take 20 shots a ball game. 14, 15, 16, something in that range. As the usage comes off a little, so too does the value. That's not to say that he's not still having a great season. It's just that things have a way of leveling. That's all. They level over the course of a long year. Terry Rozier's been awesome after a slow start. Just enjoy it. I don't think you're going to get good enough value if you were thinking about trying to trade him away. Miles Bridges continues to be really good. He's a third rounder, even after the drop-off. That's, I think, better than we all expected. So cool. Yeah, cool stuff. Cody Martin, perfect off the bench here. Low usage, but still probably schedule streamable with Kelly Oubre in protocols. On the Philly side, I am now a bit worried about Matisse Thybulle. He played just 16 minutes here with Tyrese Maxey back. That sort of wedged all of the guards and wings into one bucket, whereas they were sort of sharing two buckets for a little bit. But Maxey now took all the point guard minutes, and Seth Curry's going to take all the shooting guard minutes, which means Furkan Korkmaz, Matisse Thybulle, Danny Green are basically all fighting for backup shooting guard and then whatever is available at small forward. And George Niang might be involved in that as well. I think you can probably dump all of those guys. Green, Thybulle, Niang, Korkmaz, whoever. So you probably just go to 4 of the Philly starters at this point. Orlando was without their big man. No Mo Bamba, who apparently is on the trade block. No Wendell Carter Jr., so Robin Lopez doubled in 31 minutes. He'd be a good fill-in if both of those guys are out again. Although the safer play when the big men are out is Chuma Okeke, because he gets to start and play big power forward minutes, and we know he can just go buck wild in the steals department. I would say it's worth adding Okeke, especially in the roto side, if there's no moves limit, just to kind of see whether or not he gets another opportunity to start. And I still can't figure out how I got so many Terrence Ross shares across my various leagues. I have so many Terrence Rosses. He's actually been really, really good for the last month, and no one's paying attention at all. Over his last month, which I realized there were some games off in there. He missed the second half of December, so his last month is really only about 6 or 7 ball games. But over that stretch, and even a few games before it, Terrence Ross is averaging over 20 points a game, 5 boards, 3 assists, 2 3-pointers. He's always been a really good free throw guy. And a field goal percent is a little bit high, but not like the massive mean reversion. He's at 46 and change percent. That'll come down to like 43, but it's not like he's at 60% with a huge drop-off coming. He's getting a ton of shots. This is great. This is what we expected from T. Ross after the trade deadline last year when they sent everybody away. And he was just, he sort of rested down the stretch. So he's an all formats guy right now. And I cannot figure why there isn't more excitement around what he's done. I think it's probably just because it tends to flame out. And it might again. But, we're talking about a 10-game sample size now. And if you can keep getting 10 games of top 50 production out of a guy, it doesn't matter when it ends. You do it. Thomas Bryant played 12 minutes in his return for the Wizards. That left Daniel Gafford with only 16 and Montrezl Harrell with 21. I'm guessing all 3 of those guys end up on waiver wires. That's the way it's looking. I think you hold Gafford a little bit longer because he can do it in 19 minutes. I mean, hell, even this line was not that awful. 4 for 4 from the field, couple of blocks. Salvaged it. I know the counting stats weren't there. Kuzma's a start. Dinwiddie's a start. KCP is a start. He wasn't quite as good here, but he's definitely a go. And Washington has a lot of guys that are sort of interesting with Bradley Beal out for a week and change now. But keep an eye on that center stuff. That's a trouble spot. Dallas didn't show up for this ball game. We can probably throw this one out. Wouldn't worry too much about it. Kristaps Porzingis still dealing with COVID after effects. Hopefully he'll be back soon. Nerlens Noel came back for the Knicks, who also made a trade today. I thought about talking about that at the opening of the show, and then I thought, we'll just talk about it when we get there. The Knicks acquired Cam Reddish from the Atlanta Hawks. Now, for the Knicks, there's a few things to discuss here. Number one, with Nerlens Noel back, I'm actually adding him because he played 21 minutes off the bench, and 21 minutes actually does tend to be enough for Nerlens. Historically, although it has been tougher to come by any shots in the Knicks offense. Mitchell Robinson as the starter is a guy that most likely does need to remain on your team. He had one of his better games of the season here. His blocks have been a little better the last couple of days. Is that the opponent? Maybe. Hopefully it trends into something else. RJ Barrett's had a few hot ones. Don't worry about it if you're in a category league. And Alec Burks, who got the start, had another solid ball game, but this is where things get a little bit clunky. Kemba Walker is supposed to come back at some point, and now the Knicks just traded for Cam Reddish. without giving up any of those guys. And, by the way, Derrick Rose might show up again at some point. So there is a potential clutter happening in New York, and we don't really know how it's all going to shake out. Our best guess from the fantasy analyst side is Cam Reddish gets in. Either he wins Tom Thibodeau over or he doesn't. And if he does, he might just take Evan Fournier's 30 minutes. It's quite conceivable. Or Alec Burks' 30 minutes. Very possible. It's also possible he comes in and gets 20 minutes off the bench. Knicks found a way to get a little more scoring pop off their bench. For now, you hold Alec Burks. You were never picking up Evan Fournier anyway. And you add Cam Reddish just to see what happens. So yes, I think Nerlens Noel is probably worth a spot. Mitchell Robinson, yes. Burks for now. And Reddish also for now. Miami smoked Atlanta. The Hawks have serious problems at the moment. But Deandre Hunter, for one day, was not one of them. I liked that he took 11 shots in 24 minutes. I don't like the fact that he really isn't doing anything besides shooting this season. It's nice to see him back. That was good news. But he's sort of, after last year, we saw some really nice percentages, some really good scoring numbers. He was grabbing a few rebounds. This season, and we'll see if coming back from injury things level off a little bit. He just hasn't rebounded at all. The steals and blocks haven't been there. He's not a big-time three-point shooter, but there's some, I guess, so we're not going to ding him on that one. But he's basically turned himself into I'm going to do it with percentages and points. And it's really hard to be good at fantasy when you're only doing 3 categories. 4 if you count the fact that he's probably not going to turn it over. So no, I'm not racing out to pick him up. With the Reddish trade, Bogdan Bogdanovic probably slots into a much safer position as the other guy you can utilize. And as far as Onyeka Okongwu goes, 0 for 4 at the free throw line is abysmal. But if he makes his free throws, we're talking about how this was actually not that horrible of a ball game. That's the difference. He made all 3 of his shots from the field, generally been a decent percentages guy this season so far, and he's racked up pretty good numbers. So keep rolling him out there as long as Clint Capella is out, and don't worry too much about it. On the Miami side, Dwayne Dedmon came back, played 18 minutes. I do wonder how the Dedmon-Yurtseven thing shakes out. Yurtseven got through with a good fantasy line, but every time you start either of those guys right now, you're kind of rolling the dice that the roles aren't going to shift, and they very well might. Maybe, just maybe, someday, we'll see Jimmy Butler again. Houston beat San Antonio on the road. This was the Eric Gordon game. Good gravy. Christian Wood is basically the only rocket I'm touching. I know I mentioned Jalen Green. It's probably a better fit for points leagues right now. He's getting a bunch of shots. He's not making that many of them. I do still think that he does get better. Every 2 weeks or so, he's going to get better. This is kind of that active stash thing that makes more sense on the head-to-head side. For the Spurs, Devin Vassell came back. If he ramps up into a starter spot, that'd be swell. Swell Vassell. As soon as you see him with a starter's tag, you pick him up. Until then, DeJounte Murray, Jakob Poeltl, Derek White are the guys that are a go. I know Bryn Forbes had a good ball game, but I don't care. We just wait on White. Derek White should be back, I think, for the next one. Cleveland beat Utah. Jazz are a mess without Rudy Gobert. That's where we're at there. Start Royce O'Neal. As long as Gobert and Whiteside are out, he's effectively playing center for the Jazz, which is rad because that means more rebounds, more defensive stats. However long it takes. I think we probably get Gobert back somewhat soon, and then the whole thing comes crashing down. But again, from the Roto side, if you can squeeze 1 or 2 games out of a guy, you do it. So Royce O'Neal is that guy on the Jazz right now. Cleveland, they're a predictable lot, at the very least. Rajon Rondo out with a sore hamstring. He was the guy we were keeping tabs on. Otherwise, I know Lamar Stevens had a big game, but I don't really care about that. Markkanen, Garland, Love, Allen, Mobley. Pretty easy there. Kings beat the Lakers, shooting 55% from the field. Lakers' defense was truly bad. I didn't want to put it out on Twitter because I didn't really want to start a fight, but LeBron didn't close out on anyone yesterday. He looks gassed, and he looks like someone who's expending all of his energy in offense. 34 points is nice, but 29 shots to get there is not so nice. This just wasn't a very good game for LeBron. Even though the box score might tell you otherwise, everyone's going to be talking about how Russ was terrible, and he was. Shot the ball horrifically. LeBron was a minus 12. Russ was a minus 7. I know that it doesn't tell the whole story, but the Lakers were worse when LeBron was on the court in yesterday's ball game. I don't know why no one is talking about that. They had their little runs. They opened up the bigger lead when it was Russ leading the team. It was a bunch of guys fighting. Malik Monk, Austin Reeves, Stanley Johnson, Dwight Howard were out there for stretches. Avery Bradley. These guys were just fighting. Not that Monk was a minus 14, although the real note I thought was Dwight Howard. He played really well. He was a plus 9 in his 15 minutes. They just didn't give him enough. I thought the Lakers played their hand kind of dumb. That falls on Frank Vogel. He should have seen what I could see. I'm an idiot, and I saw it on TV. I was like, look, these guys are not fighting. Half the team isn't fighting right now. Dwight Howard was fighting. Get someone out there who's gonna battle. Austin Reeves was battling. He was break even. He played 28 minutes. Plus minus was 0 in a game his team lost by 9. Dwight plus 9. Wayne Ellington was plus 12, but that meant nothing. Stanley Johnson plus 3. Get the guys out there that were fighting. Who cares if you bruise an ego for one night? I know you got to play Bron 39 minutes, but do you? If he's as gassed as I know they had a couple days off too. You guys know me. I watch Laker games. I get a little caught up in them. Very pragmatic fantasy player. Aren't you all glad we picked up Malik Monk? I think we were pretty early on that one. That's a good one for us. That's a good one. Keep rolling with Malik, LeBron, and that's it. Sorry, Russ. Sorry. Kings side, Rashawn Holmes getting closer. He's still day-to-day. Shemazy Metu got the start at center. He was quite good. If someone were to come up to me and say he was going to play 30 minutes a game, I would definitely pick him up. And our very own Aaron Brewski tweeted out a report that the Kings, or rumor, I should say, that the Kings are looking to move Harrison Barnes, Marvin Bagley, and even maybe some of the core guys, which everyone's talking about who to stash going into the trade deadline. Metu could be a really interesting name. If, let's say, Barnes and Holmes got moved, Metu would play a ton. If Bagley and Barnes get moved, I think Metu would still play a pretty good chunk. He's a guy you could squat on. I know it's maybe too far out right now, trade deadline almost a full month away, but that's a big name to watch closely. By the way, good to see Harrison Barnes have a better ball game again. And then Brooklyn, Chicago ended up with the late slot, and James Harden dunked on him. 25, 7, and 16. So much for that buy low window, huh? Harden back up to number 8 per game in 9-cat. KD was brilliant once again. He's number 3 in 9-cat. But then the Nets are resting everybody. They got a game against Oklahoma City, except Harden. This should be a real interesting one for him. On that Chicago side, they're still waiting on poor Alex Caruso. He's a guy I think you could get kind of on the cheap. Someone mentioned that he got dropped. I think I talked about it on Twitter. Caruso got dropped. If Caruso got dropped, you pick him up. If he didn't get dropped, go see if you can get him for, I don't know, like Andrew Wiggins, Buddy Hield, guys in that 95 to 105 range. Larry Markkinen, Herb Jones. People have been gushing over Herb. Tyler Hero, who's been obviously a lot better with no Jimmy Butler. That's a bet that Butler somehow plays along the way. Probably not going to get him. Jordan Poole's been trending down. Will Barton. I'd throw Will Barton at Alex Caruso. Franz Wagner. Although he might get better in the second half. That one, maybe throw that one out. Friends, I want to thank all of you guys for checking out our pals at Manscaped and MyBookie, but I do want to remind you here, towards the end of the program today, of our partnership with the good folks at ThriveFantasy.com. I'm not going to inundate you with the deal, because you've heard me talk about that 1,000 times. I'm going to tell you to use the promo code ETHOS, E-T-H-O-S, ETHOS, E-T-H-O-S, to get the deal. But I'm basically just going to say, go check it out. We've won you way more than $10 with this podcast. So all I'm asking you to do is open up an account and put $10 in it and screw around with it. Because you get the extra 10 deposit match. You get the two $20 contest vouchers. Screw around. Maybe you win some money. You can cash out if you want after that. Take your $10 if you can turn it into 15, 20, whatever. Cash out. Tell me about it. I'd love to spread the story. Spread the good story of everybody winning prop bet money with us over at thrivefantasy.com using promo code ETHOS. They're really fun to work with. It's a super fun website. Check it out. That's it. I'm just asking you guys to check it out. Super easy. thrivefantasy.com or the Thrive Fantasy app. Promo code, once again, is ETHOS. And that is your Thursday show. I may have some MyBookie prizes, by the way. Another reason to follow me on Twitter. Make sure you get that. And we're into recruiting season here. This is the best time to do it. Because we ask that anybody that comes aboard as a recruit can make it through to the end of the season. Guess what? You're halfway through. Wicked awesome, right? Oh, by the way, no, that's not right. Someone made a joke that James Harden was going to be out. He's not out. The joke was that he was going to be dealing with Lou Dort. Nope. Almost got tricked at the end of the podcast. You guys can't get me on Twitter. I'm too sharp. As my dad used to say, mind like a steel sieve. But at least it's made out of steel. Have a great Thursday, everybody. I'm Dan Besbris at DANBESBRIS. Hey, drop a 5-star review on the pod. I think we're at 750 now. 800, next goal. Let's see if we can get there. Maybe I'll even drop a prize on somebody. What do you guys think about that? Contest time? Why the hell not? Let's do a contest. Not on the show. Contest is on social media. Follow Ethos Fantasy BK and at Dan Besbris so you guys know when the contest is coming. Because I don't even know when it's coming. I got to come up with it first. Tomorrow, we'll recap the week, get you set for the weekend, rest my voice a little bit, see if we can all hang on here. Fantasy wacky season all year long. Later.